right. Our next panel is brought to us by 92Y's very close friends and collaborators at the United Nations Foundation. Sex Matters, Female Empowerment Through Access to Contraception. Please join me in welcoming an amazing panel. Latanya Mapp-Frett, Vice President at Planned Parenthood Global. Kechi Ogbogu, Senior Technical Advisor at UNFPA. Joining us via Skype, Sandra Fluke, politician and activist. Our moderator today, Ilse Mengalis, Director of Global Partnerships at the United Nations Foundation. And Dr. Musimbi Kanyaro, President and CEO at the Global Fund for Women. Let's give them a big warm welcome.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. I know it's been a long few, a few sessions since the last break, and that we are the last panel before lunch. But this is a sexy topic. We gave it a sexy name because we're here to tell you what a sexy topic this is, maybe in ways that you didn't quite know yet. And we are very honored to be here with some of the rock stars of family planning and contraception from around the world, in fact. They have decades of experience. In fact, I did the math between all of us. We have over a century of experience, but we're here to share it with you today because our goal is to help you understand how compelling and how important this issue is. It's something that we take for granted living here in the United States, where we have full access to this issue, to these services, more or less. But it's really still an issue that's regarded as controversial. And on the other hand, in fact, it is from a rights, a women's empowerment, and also from a global development standpoint, it is incredibly important and compelling, and we're here to tell you about that today, and I hope that you'll learn something, so thank you. So welcome, panel. We're going to start with Sandra, who is joining us by Skype from LA. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
So we'll do very quick introductions because we have a large panel and a small amount of time. So I do urge you to read these women's bios. They are incredible. I think most of you know who Sandra is. She came to national prominence in 2012 when she testified before Congress about the importance of access to contraception. I'll let Sandra tell you that story. But today she's joining us from LA and not here because she had an important week. Sandra is running for the California State Senate, and on Tuesday she advanced through the primary, and she's headed to November's general election. So let's give her a round of applause. So, Sandra, you've been an outspoken supporter of contraceptive access for women here and in the United States. You're an attorney, so you know a lot of the background issues well. In all the debates that you've been a part of and that you have witnessed, and that indeed you waded into unwittingly probably 2 years ago, what do you see are the dangers that face women in this country still on this topic? Tell us about that.
Well, I think that in this country, our fight is about access and affordable access. So, are you guys getting it? Our fight is access, affordable access. So the question is not whether women have right to access reproductive health, or it's whether or not they can it, whether there is government funding for programs like Title X, which provides affordable access and clinics for our sisters and brothers. And it's also a question of whether or not there are clinics located in your community. And we actually are seeing attacks from the very far right, really pushing out some misleading information about contraception in terms of health consequences, and beginning to say that it's immoral to use contraception. So there's a movement not just around abortion, but about contraception here in the United States.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Sandra. So stick with us. We'll come back to you toward the end of the session. Thank you. So I'm very pleased to introduce Latanya Mapp-Frett. She's the Vice President of Global at Planned Parenthood Federation of America, PPFA, which most of you know. What most of you may not know is that PPFA has an international arm, which is what LaTanya leads. She's also an attorney by training. And so she leads the program's work internationally, primarily in Africa and Latin America. So LaTanya, I would like to talk to you about bridging our view of this issue here in the United States. I think everyone in the room knows what Planned Parenthood Federation is, Planned Parenthood clinics, but you lead the global work. So tell us about the connection between family planning issues in the United States and abroad, and what are the things about your programs that are common everywhere and that really work?
Thank you, Elsa. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. I was here yesterday with many of you and saw some of the amazing people on this stage. And I think while many of our issues have changed here in the United States, many still we have to struggle towards. And I think this is one of those issues. And I think the key to what Sandra mentioned was not just access, but affordable access. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so while I'm here in the United States and I've lived overseas for a long time, it's always just so heart-wrenching for me to see how many people, particularly in my community, the African-American community, are still struggling with the issues of teenage pregnancy and this cycle of poverty that is produced from it. And so for us at Planned Parenthood Global, as it is with Planned Parenthoods all around the United States and around the world, our goal is to make sure that we empower young people with information to make sure that they're able to make the right choices before they land themselves in situations that are often very difficult for them. And in particular, in the countries where we work, in Africa and Latin America, empowering a young person with knowledge about contraception is just not enough. It requires much more of an intervention to make sure that then after they have that information, that they're able to actually reach clinics that will be able to provide them with affordable and most often free contraception. And so the program that we most are proud of, I guess, is that our program really combines or takes the opportunity to combine this peer education model with a model of community health work. So we actually train young people that are in high school and starting out in college on how to provide contraceptive counseling to their peers at school, in their communities, at their churches, so that they're able to not only just suggest what is the best thing in what that individual needs, but also to be able to give that contraception to them every month. And I just want to give a shout out because the last session was about the Girl Child Rising, and so many of the people that we talk to and the young people that are doing what we call the youth peer provider model are actually young men as well. And it's just exceptionally important that we don't forget that this information and choices about contraception really has to involve young boys. And we found that in our work in Africa and Latin America, it's just exceptional that they really want to be at the table. They want to be counseling their male peers as well as female peers about this and make sure that this cycle of poverty and this ability to move and be something that you want to be is available to everyone.
Do you see that in all of the countries where you work?
We see it in every single country where we work, where young people have access to contraception and information about it, that their lives change. And not just their lives, I mean the lives of their communities, the lives of their countries change. So it happened here in the US. I mean, when contraceptive became available to women, women were able to then make different choices, to stay in school longer, to get jobs that they weren't able to get before. So, I mean, I think we all, and particularly this room, know that it is empowering to be able to decide when and if you're able to have a child. So, yeah, it's the same everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so I'd like to turn to Kechi Abwagu, who is the Senior Technical Advisor at UNFPA, which is the UN Fund for Population. Kechi is a commodities expert, which in the world of family planning basically means she's an expert on service delivery and issues like method mix and so forth. She's a public health physician with over 25 years of experience and works on programs and overseas programs in over 50 countries. So bringing you an incredible amount of experience. And Kechi, I would like for you to talk a little bit about what the priorities are among global family planning experts. What do you see after a long career of watching this issue evolve? What has changed, and what would you say are the the top issues right now that we really need to be focusing on to make a difference in the developing world. And I just want to let everyone know in the audience that right now there are over 220 million women around the world who want contraception and don't have access to contraception. So if you could talk to us about what that means and what are the solutions that we really need to be putting into place.
Thank you very much, Ilse, and thank you so much for having me here, both on behalf of UNFPA, but also on behalf of FP 2020, that I have the privilege of co-leading the Country Engagement Working Group. And I think I want to pitch where you stopped, when you talked about the 220 women. Let me say that that is perhaps the tip of the iceberg. It's a bit of an understatement, because often that is looking at women in union, married women. Many of the young people and adolescents haven't even been counted. And so there's a huge need out there. But let me also say that for decades, we in UNFPA and many other partners, PPFA, IPPF, all the other partners, have been working to try to make a difference. It was music to our souls 2 years ago at the London Summit when partners mobilized and governments around the agenda. It is great. Let me not say that we are aware of what needs to be done and progress is being made. Working with countries, we have many countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa and less developed countries where the need is highest, progress is beginning to be made. We have countries like Rwanda, Ethiopia, Madagascar, Sierra Leone in recent times who are beginning to record very impressive rises in contraceptive use and contraceptive prevalence. But having said that, I'm going to be particularly provocative and try to illustrate the huge need that still exists out there today, which is the reason that why we're here talking to you. Let me do that by being provocative and discussing the methods that women use. And I'm going to use America, for instance, the US, and I'm going to compare it to sub-Saharan Africa, where the need is highest. Wonderful, beautiful women and men like you here in the US and other developed countries, when you want to meet your family planning needs, your contraceptive needs, the most common methods of use are female sterilization, male sterilization, pills, followed by IUDs, and those are generally the often most used. I wonder why. I will leave you to think about that. But let me turn to sub-Saharan Africa and tell you what they use. Let me try to illustrate it by discussing two women. I will start with Iyabo, who is a mother of two. She's 32 years old. She wants to limit her family or even stop having children. She comes from a poor community, which is the majority of the profile for women in sub-Saharan Africa and so on. Services are far and in between, but she does need services desperately. I will also talk about Ngozi, who is 16 years old. She's young, she's ambitious, she wants to go to college. But she's also a beautiful young girl. She has relationships, she has a boyfriend. She also has needs for contraception in her own way. Iyabo goes to the clinic, and she started by having injections, Depo-Provera. Later, she got an implant. Both great methods, both represent her need, but that is increasingly the trend of use in sub-Saharan Africa. And the increases in use that we reported about is oftentimes because of these two major methods. But let me tell you something about these two major methods. Why is it the most commonly used? One is that when you use Depo or when you use the implant, you don't necessarily have to go to a clinic every month. And if you have to make a journey of 20, 30, 1 hour to a clinic to get it, it makes sense that you can go take something that will last you at the very least 3 months, but may even last you 3 or 5 years. So that is where the trend is going, really for two major reasons. One is that they do not have quality services near enough to them so that they can go take a pill every month. No, they don't have it. Or perhaps a pharmacy where they can go and buy a pill. And the second reason is that These are surreptitious methods. And by that I mean they can take these methods without having to ask for approval, either from the husband or from the disapproving mother-in-law, or even the neighbor who says, okay, what is she doing? But if these are the most common methods, what does it mean for Ngozi, the 16-year-old? These methods are often given in clinics where Ngozi is usually not welcome. It speaks volumes about accessibility of services for young people. And therefore, when we see work by people like PPFA, we thank you, because they need them so desperately. The point I'm making here is that we should all jointly share a dream, a vision. We're working together, you and I, who have been privileged to be able to get sterilized if that's what we want, to be able to have an IUCD if that's what we want, to be able to have easily purchase a set of pills and take them every month and not have to ask anybody for permission to do so. To be able to empower our sisters and daughters and wives on the other side of the continent to be able to have the right to choose. Because what the methods that they're using now is really telling us, this is often the untold story, is that even though access, so to say, is improving and use is improving, it is not because they have the right, they're making the choices they want. That is the fundamental thing before us. I think you and I, all of us here, and it's such a pleasure to look at this audience, who are already empowered, who are already privileged, but to whom I say you have a duty, an obligation to make sure that what we take as normal every day can also be enjoyed by our sisters and counterparts in those countries. We are working at it, and this is the time, this is the moment to talk to you. If you permit me, let me perhaps wind up by quoting the Secretary General of the United Nations, who was recently in the Sahel with the President of the World Bank and with Babatunde Oshotimeni, the Executive Director of UNFPA. He said, help us to create conditions. He was talking to them in the Sahel, but it applies to all of us. Help us to create conditions where our daughters, your sisters, your wives have full equality. Help us to create families where mothers and fathers decide how many children they want to have and when to have them. This is the time to do it. It is now. And therefore, we have a duty to do so. I am turning to you particularly today because while we are overjoyed that partners are mobilizing, particularly in the wake of the summit, there is an urgent need for more and more involvement of people like you within your organizations, within the private sector, particularly in the United States. And let me give a shout out at this point to Melinda Gates, who is flagging this flag, a woman with enough courage to come out and say, this is indeed a cause we all need to, to take on. We need you. We need you. We need the resources, the experience, whatever your organizations can bring to the issue. But we need every single man and woman here today to accept that this is a worthwhile cause, to which in your own little way, you will start today to be a part of. We need you as advocates. We need you as resource mobilizers. We need you there, encouraging the women and the young people on that side of the world and giving them hope that someday they can indeed choose and have a right to decide what they want to do, how many children they want to have, when they want to have it, whether they can further their education or not. I thank you.
Okay. Spoken like a true Nigerian with a lot of passion and conviction. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Musimbi Kanyoro, who is joining us via London on her way back to San Francisco, where she is the president and CEO of the Global Fund for Women. And Dr. Kanyoro has has a global purview on this issue. Her career has also spanned more than 20 years and has spanned the world. And so, Musimba, you have a very holistic view of this issue from our conversation leading up to this panel. And it would be great if you could just share what you see as the connection, really kind of tying what S.H.E was saying. What is the connection between this lack of access and women's empowerment? And so what threatens that access and opportunity for empowerment, and what are the things that support it?
Thank you very much. We have limited time, so I'm going to be really brief. So in 1974, the women of the world had the message of reproductive health, and they embraced it. They embraced it, but they wanted it to be a message which we can relate to personally from our own power as women, so that we know that family planning, we know that contraception is good for us. It's been there for only 50 years, by the way, a little bit like 51, 52 years we've had contraceptives available to us. But during this time, there has been quite a lot of progress in the empowerment of women, in the decisions that women make, in the places where women are in terms of employment, in terms of employment, in terms of what they actually even do for themselves. So what is standing in the way? What is standing in the way is often of access. It's not just that there are lack of contraceptives. Sometimes it's the power game that is there in the families. There are places where there are possibilities to access contraceptives, but women can't go to those places just because they don't have the permission of their partners. And so when we work holistically, we are working on the empowerment of women to make their own decision. My sister talked about choice. There are so many women who do not have choice. The second important thing is the infrastructure of where those services are available. We know that in many countries where we have talked about today, the infrastructure is really poor. And women in rural areas, women in far slum areas, women in places where they cannot access the contraceptives unless the services go to them, they will not be able to access them. So part of the advocacy is actually to make access not for women to be the ones who are struggling all of the time to go for those services, but the services to come to the women, because they are there not sitting around, but actually looking after children, they are there doing farming, they are there doing different things. The third important thing that I really want to talk about empowerment, which is very dear to us as the Global Fund for Women, is information and knowledge. Because for many women, for many young people, when you do not know what you miss, it's not there. So information and knowledge is key. And information and knowledge can come in many forms, but those forms have to be friendly and appropriate for different ages, for different communities, for different women, and they have to be able to be reduced to the level at which the people are getting that information. If a university student needs, you can just do it in a Twitter, and that's all right. By the way, you can tweet information about the fact that people need to have access to information. But when you have to get that information also to people that are far removed, it needs to be in their languages. So the Global Fund, we really try to see that people are understanding that we need language appropriate, information appropriate, and we need that age appropriate information. And it needs to be there. And no shyness about speaking about sex and sexuality, because these are normal human possibilities. And it is important for us to see sexual reproductive health as a human right, an entitlement for women, and not as an added aspect of our work. Sexual and reproductive health is a human right. And when it's a human right, it means that when women do not have access to it, when they do not have access to contraceptives, when they don't have access to information, their rights are actually being violated. And we should be involved. Get involved. Get involved and make sure that nobody is left out, because we are violating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Access to contraceptives is a right for us, is a right for human beings. And finally, I wanted to say, 3/4 of the world population today are young people. Mm-hmm. I wanted to say there are 7 billion people, of whom half could be women. If we look at this, we have a lot of power. If you're a woman, you have a lot of power. If we do not have that decision and make the decision, tomorrow we could double the population if we want to. So we hold a lot of power. And I think that those of you that...
That's right.
We are at appropriate time to work with businesses, to work with governments, to work with the community organizations, civil society, and then individually to actually claim this power and do something, because the repercussions are great. We're going to affect populations, and reducing populations is good for everybody. We are going to affect the economies of our countries, and by both participating or hindering the growth of those economies. We're going to make schools be available for girls. It's not enough to simply say we want to have girls to go to school if there are no schools, or if the students are too many for a class. So we hold that power. And I just wanted to call upon those of you that are coming from brands, from companies, etc., work with women, and work with women who are organizing to bring a change, because that's really important for all of us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sandra, I want to come back to you very quickly before we wrap up, but just before we do that, how many people in the audience work for a company? Okay, that's probably about 75% of you. So we'll come back to that in a minute, because I'd like to wrap up with what people can do. And Sandra, we're taking a global purview today, but you are a emerging political leader in the United States of America, and we all live here. So what are the kinds of things from a political standpoint, from an advocacy standpoint, that a woman can do in the next week, in the next year, to help advance some of the issues that we covered today in the panel? Just briefly.
Well, I want to just point out the way in which there are issues here legally that are still at stake around contraception, and it's so important to make our voices heard on these by contacting various legislators and other types of decision makers. And, the first item is that we will be seeing a decision from the Supreme Court, likely at the end of this month, around the Affordable Care Act's insurance requirements that insurance cover contraception. And what's so interesting about those cases is that one of the arguments that is at stake is that access to contraception is about gender discrimination if it's denied, because contraception really does open the door for women to be able to plan and control their career paths and their family paths. So something that we tend to think about in a developing world context of that access to contraception really helps to determine women's opportunities is equally true in the United States and is actually embedded in the legal reasoning as well. Some of the current legislative battles beyond that one that has gotten so much press around the Affordable Care Act are about cutting off funding to programs like Planned Parenthood and other types of community clinics, where it's really important to educate others that that the services that those types of clinics provide and that those programs provide are really, of course, abortion access is an important part of it, but go much, much further beyond that. And in the case of Planned Parenthood, 90% of what they're providing is not about abortion access. So it is about things like affordable access to contraception. Here in California, we're actually seeing a couple of other problems that are not unique just to California. There's an issue where our state penitentiaries were illegally encouraging, the doctors on staff there were illegally persuading women to have sterilizations when they gave birth. And this was coming out of a belief that women who had had a number of children and who were economically disadvantaged, were poorer members of our society, shouldn't be having more children. And this really gets to one of the challenges I think we're facing as a society, is understanding that our respect for reproductive rights and for reproductive choice and decision making that underlies the idea that women get to decide whether or not they will have a child that means they get to decide whether or not. It's not just about the right to decide to have an abortion, it's about also the right to decide to have a child. And that's one of the things that we still struggle with at times when the question is posed around women who are more economically challenged, women who have drug addiction, and other types of challenges as well. One policy that is a good case in point is the family cap policy, which is in place in, I believe, about a dozen and a half states right now, which in some form says that women who are on public assistance cannot get any additional benefits for children if those children are born while they're on public assistance. And here in California, the policy has exceptions only if women are using certain forms of contraception. So it's taking away women's decision-making ability about which types of contraception they can use, and also taking away that kind of support and open decision-making about their family choices as well, which is especially problematic given that we have so little movement between economic strata within the US, and someone can spend their entire life in that kind of a position. So these are some of the legal questions that it's really important to be making our voices heard on. There is incredible outcry over this family cap policy in California, and for several years we've been pushing to change it, but we just had a bill get stuck in committee in a very permanent manner. And so it hasn't been effective enough. There's still more that needs to be done. And these fights are really very critical and impacting women's lives here as well as around the world.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. So to wrap up, we're over time, so I just want to issue one call to action to those of you here and who were moved by this. Just to wrap up, as you could see, this is an issue that impacts every single individual woman. It's an issue of human rights. It's an issue of women's rights. Beyond that, as Dr. Cañora alluded to, it also has an impact on everyone's quality of life on the planet. And it's also a matter of life and death. Over a third of maternal deaths could be prevented around the world if women had access to family planning. Many millions more children die than need to because, again, of lack of access to family planning. It's breathtaking, Sandra, to hear you lay out the assault on access to family planning rights here in the United States, in fact. So one of the things that we want to do at the UN Foundation, and this is what I want to leave you with, is engaging companies. Companies are involved in every other aspect of global development because of our global economy. And so they're involved in everything from education to water, sanitation, in the realm of health, malaria, tuberculosis. It's all incredibly important. Not a single company in the world, except for the ones that manufacture contraceptives, support family planning access, yet it is so incredibly vital to the quality of life for every woman, every couple, and everybody on this planet. So at the UN Foundation, we are teaming up with Merck for Mothers, who you heard from earlier in the conference, who have put forth millions and millions of dollars to help end needless maternal mortality. And we're focusing on the family planning piece, and we want to see if we can get 5 companies to step up and work with us on family planning. We have a really compelling action plan that's applicable to any country of the world that's of interest to companies, and we urge you to get in touch with us. So if you go to the UN Foundation website and search under UN Foundation Family Planning, there's contact information there, and you can get in touch with us. And so if you were moved by this, please go back and talk to the executives in your company about whether or not they want to consider adding this to their social responsibility portfolio. And we have very, very good and compelling arguments as to why that's the case. I wish I could bring all these women with me to those meetings because they're incredible storytellers. And I thank each and every one of you. You were really wonderful. And thank you as well for joining us today. Thank you.